as Captain Friedmont's ship began firing on the oncoming enemy vessels. As exovol made its greatest amount of haste towards the planet in front of it, another series of jolts running through it, as Mika and her crew shook on board, sparks flying from control panels, the entire ship shaking around them, smoke beginning to emanate from different segments of it. Captain, our shields are down to 19%. We've taken heavy physical damage. We've got no less than 12 hull breaches. Can you give me light speed? Mika shouted, looking over to Vermi. Sorry, Captain. Light speed's no go. Even if I shut everything else down, the power relays are completely fried. Frankly, it's a surprise we still have shields. But we won't if they keep this firing up. It was at that point that another bright flash, this time of a yellowish sort of light, appeared in the space in front of Exovol's destination. Another ship. This one not as recognizable, but still one they had seen. It was one of their Tier 2 companion ships. Backup. Oh, thank goodness. About freaking time, Mika said. Captain, we've just got sensors back on. It's still a bit janky, but we're picking up signals again. I don't know whether this is good or bad news, but there have been a large number of light speed activations within the system. Nearly a dozen of them scattered over the last few minutes. Some of them coming from near the asteroid belt. Others from different segments of the system. It appears everyone's showing up to this little party, the crew member said, as the new Allied ship began firing on the oncoming vessels. Now, finally, it seemed as if the primary pressure was off of Exovol, with the fire now scattering between the different ships. But the enemy vessels were still trailing along, following Mika's path, and every once in a while letting off a shot in her direction. One after another, ships began dropping out of light speed around where they were. A few were friendlies, and a few weren't. In no time at all, this had become a full-scale battle zone, a moving decathlon of destruction heading right for the planet rich with the resources that everyone was fighting for. According to our calculations, we should reach the planet in less than 3 minutes. Enemy and allied ships are in heavy confrontation. Our allies, for the time being, seem to be covering us. Very little is getting through to us. And Exovol's nanites are working overtime, patching the hull breaches, and attempting to assist in restoring systems, Dolus shouted, as they rushed towards the planet with all haste, surrounded on all sides with a gauntlet of plasma cannons, laser arrays, and spaceborne missiles. Exovol doing its best in its damaged state to evade as much as it could. Tell me someone has the schematics for this Darien device. How is it deployed? We're not going to have spare time to figure it out once we get there. We have to do it now. Yes, Captain. I'm looking over the schematics now, and the information given to us by the shippers, a crew member said as he began to sift through a display screen. A few moments passed as he looked the instructions over. According to the instructions, Captain, the device is meant to be released in orbit of the planet. It then makes a full-scale drop, impacting the surface and spreading out in order to fulfill its design purposes. It's designed to be able to withstand the impact. So all we do is fly to the planet and let it go, right? Yeah, bit of a problem, Captain. In order to activate, it requires that it gets a signal from us. We've already connected to the device and we're ready to send the signal. However, the device is facing the wrong direction. What? Mika replied. What do you mean it's facing the wrong direction? Can it right itself? No, Captain. The device has no trajectory alteration equipment, no jets or propulsion systems of any kind. It's meant to simply be dropped in the appropriate position. And right now, the segment that is meant to be dropped facing the planet that it lands on is facing in towards the center of the ship. So we can't simply fly by and let it go in orbit without sticking around to alter its angles and trajectory manually, which will take time. Time is not a luxury we have right now, Mika shouted out. Wait a second, Mika replied as she began to think the situation over. Can you activate it while it's still inside of the control field? Yes, Captain, the crew member replied. But why would we do that? Listen, if the part that needs to be facing the planet is facing in towards the center of exovol, in other words, the same direction that we're going, then all we have to do is angle ourselves in that direction, and then dive bomb a little bit. Captain, that'll put us on a nosedive trajectory into the planet. I'm aware what that'll do. But remember, the device doesn't have any propulsion or maneuverability. We do. Vermi, plot a course. Take us into a dive bomb into the atmosphere of the planet. Once we're in close enough range to fulfill the drop, activate the device. We'll maintain it, keeping it into the stasis field while we dive bomb towards the planet. Then, we release the control arms and the stasis field. We use our propulsion to pull ourselves ahead. With no propulsion backing it up, we'll be able to move faster than the falling object. Then we pull ourselves out of the way and let the thing drop. Captain, I have to warn you that the ship's current condition is not optimal. Exovol is already too large a ship to enter the atmosphere without some level of minor damage, and that's under normal circumstances. In the condition we're in now, there's no guarantee that we'll survive entry, let alone have the capability of pulling ourselves up afterwards, Dola said as he typed into his screen, trying to balance out the countless systems on board the ship. We don't have much of an option, Dolus. We don't have time to fritter away with controlling its point of access in any normal sort of way. We just have to hope that we can withstand it. Otherwise, the moment we release it into space and start trying to rearrange it, it's going to get blown to smithereens. Captain, we're entering the planet's atmosphere now. All hands prepare. Well, let's get this rodeo underway, Mika said as they began dive bombing into the atmosphere of the world. Behind them, a war zone. Lasers and missiles and plasma fire in all directions. Near a dozen ships had already shown up to the location, and it was a firefight. As exovol began crossing through the atmosphere, fire and heat beginning to alight the outside of exovol's surface as it passed through it. Farther and farther into the planet's atmosphere, the ship dived, the surface growing closer. Captain, we've reached optimum drop level, one of the crew members announced. Good. Activate the Darien device. Dolus, release the control arms and status field. Drop shields. Yes, Captain, Dolus replied as the orders began to get carried out. As they dived further and further into the gravitational pull of this world, the Darien device sprung to life in their grasp as the four long arms began to extend and separate. "Okay, max propulsion. Get us away from this thing," Mika shouted to Vermi. "Already on it, Captain. We're pulling away at range." "Oh, this is gonna be close. According to calculations, I'm gonna have a 3-second window to pull up. A second before, and the Darien device smashes into us. A second after, and we smash into the ground. But even with our current propulsion systems, I think I can just barely manage it. Can you divert some of the nanites? Reinforce them." "Dolus." "Already on it, Captain," Dolus replied, as his hands moved rapidly about the screen that he was controlling. "We will make clearance to break away in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Vermi counted down as they pulled away from the Darien device. The exterior of the ship red hot from crossing through the atmosphere, only a minor, short distance away from the Darien device, falling rapidly behind them as they finally began to move out of the Darien device's drop path, pulling up at somewhat of an angle, but still heading towards the surface of the planet very quickly, now crossing through the cloud layer of the planet, able to clearly see the rocky, lifeless surface below. "Any time now, Vermi," Mika shouted. "What do you think I'm doing, Captain?" Vermi replied as his hands moved rapidly across the controls. "Why aren't we pulling up?" "We are, Captain, just not as fast as we want to." "Trust me, I got this," Vermi said, his hands flitting about the controls wildly, as if he were accessing 100 different controls at once, altering and changing things every moment. Come on, baby, be nice to me," Vermi said, looking at the controls as he rapidly moved about, every once in a while his eyes glancing up at the view screen and the rapidly approaching surface of the planet, as exovol's angle slowly changed, little by little, pulling up, but the surface was still growing, closer, far more so than anyone felt comfortable with. A streak of black smoke trailed in exovol's wake, fire draining out from damaged parts of the ship, hull breaches billowing thick trails of black smoke as they approached the planet's surface. Now at just enough of an angle, Vermi seemed to reach out to all the controls, countless dozens of them, activating them all individually and maximizing every single one of them, as even with the stasis field on board the ship, the crew began to feel the G-forces, the intense pressure of the speed and the change of momentum as they began to pull up more, faster, now nearly moving horizontally with the surface of the planet, rock formations beginning to whiz by, no more than a few hundred feet away from the exterior of Exovol. Meanwhile, in the background, a massive impact, that of the Darien device, striking the planet's surface at high speed and velocity. The impact sent dirt and earth in waves, a shockwave of force and impact, like the planet was hit by a meteorite, the shockwave trailing it, echoing past Exovol, shaking its form a slight bit more than it was already shaking, as finally Exovol slipped over a high-cresting range of rock formations, barely missing the top, as it finally began to pull up and away from the surface of the planet. A chorus of shouts and screams and applauding rang out as they finally began an upward trajectory away from the planet's surface and back into open space. "Mission accomplished," Vermi said, putting his head down on the control panel in front of him The Darien device has been deployed. We are now on a trajectory out of the planet's atmosphere. ETA 1 minute 13 seconds. I think both my hearts are about to jump out of my chest, Vermi said, as Mika smiled in his direction. Well, if I had two of them, I think mine would be too. I think the one I have is having a bit of trouble dealing with that. But a captain's job is never done. There's still a battle waging over our heads. Now, Vermi, set course. Find us some sort of cover. We need to slip away from this before we're blown to hell. And see about changing our state. I think we've had enough of mothership state for the time being, Mika said, staring up through the view screen to see a bright array of lights in the sky, and too far to actually see what was making them. But it was certain that the conflict between the two fleets that had begun to gather at this location was only building. It wasn't over just yet.